Hey, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to Talking Taboo. Today's conversation discussion is dysfunctional families. Okay. I have a question for everyone, and you can just raise your hand if you can relate to it, okay? How many of you all would say that you were raised in a dysfunctional family? Just by show of hands. Would you consider your family dysfunctional? Okay. Okay. Now,
In a way.
I'm sorry?
No, I mean, in a way.
Okay. Okay.
I wouldn't exactly fit into the definition, but yeah.
Next question. Why do you think we all have such a hard time seeing our families as dysfunctional? Do you think that it's simply because we don't understand the definition of it, or do you think it's more of denial? What's your perspective on that?
I think that it is more of a denial type thing because I think that what we consider family and what we consider what a good family is based off of something that isn't real for everybody. So that's why I think that it gets kind of, oh, my family's not dysfunctional or whatever, because you want to have that perfect or ideal family.
Mm-hmm. And I like that you said that, because I think every child that's born into the world, we're born with this idea that our families are perfect. We're born into the world of thinking that our parents are perfect. We don't have the innate understanding to understand right from wrong at a young age.
I think apart from denial, it's also the fact that you say, for example, you're given some kind of care, like your basic necessities are met, and there's also the case that emotionally care is extended, not the kind of care you want, but whatever they can provide you, it is extended, and it puts you in a position where you think that maybe what I'm facing isn't too big enough for me to speak up about it.
Yeah.
Because, the positive sort of compensates for the negative. And this is true for South Asian communities because there's this sense of loyalty that exists within South Asian families that it's almost impossible for people to speak up. And you don't actually have platforms where you can speak about this from the child's perspective. And also, there's also the situation that you don't think that what you're facing is big enough to talk about. Mm-hmm. I was just talking to a friend of mine about trauma, and she's studying to become a therapist, and I was asking her to define trauma for me because I felt that what I faced isn't big enough to be classified under trauma. Mm-hmm. So you end up thinking that your struggle isn't big enough to be, classified and to kind of fit into the usual definitions of these terms.
Mm-hmm. And I'm glad that you said that, Nikila, because what I think a lot of people are suffering with in society is emotional neglect. That's at the core of everything. And I think that we believe just because our parents weren't physically abusive to us, that we didn't deal with any trauma. But trauma is also inflicted by shouting at your child. It's inflicted by manipulating your child, guilt tripping your child. That's psychological and emotional abuse. It's also inflicted by ignoring your child, whether you did it intentionally or unintentionally. All these things can cause trauma to a child. And I like to think that emotional neglect and abuse and mental abuse is the core of what a lot of people are dealing with. And a way for you to know that you have dealt with emotional neglect as a child is you feel empty as an adult. You find yourself not feeling loved. You find yourself clinging with unhealthy partners and people just to fill a void. Our society, I believe, is drenching with lack of love due to emotional neglect at the core. And even if you were sexually abused, mentally abused, at the core of it all is emotional abuse. It doesn't matter. I think so many people are dealing with this and they just don't realize it, again, because mom or dad never hit me or touched me. Oh, I'm fine. But no, you're not. You're really not, because it's showing in everything else in your life.
I would like to interject that I think that people that have had abuse before in their life, I think we all minimize what has happened to us.
Mhm.
Because what the other lady, Nikilia, I'm sorry, just like what she said, because I've never really heard it that way relayed back to me, because that's usually what I'm saying to others. Coming from somebody that obviously has had trauma or abuse before, I think that we all kind of minimalize what we've been through. And I think that's the reason why a lot of people don't talk, is because it can't be that bad. Somebody's been through worse. But I think that a parent could verbally abuse somebody only, or somebody could physically abuse their child only, and their abuse and their trauma still be the same.
Yeah,
The effects from it.
that is so true. I remember posting a while back on Facebook, because I have random shower moments. Like, I'm just in my thoughts a lot. And I remember posting, asking the question, okay, I don't know if you all have heard this statement before, where people will say a piece of father is better than no father at all. Basically encouraging their children to have relationships with fathers who are inconsistent in their life. In my opinion, no, that's not serving them. The back and forth, in and out, is not serving them. That's teaching them abandonment, rejection, on top of what they're already dealing with. The back and forth is unhealthy for anybody, And imagine what that's going to teach them later on in relationships. But I remember posting this question, asking, is a piece of a father better than no father at all? Pretty much, is something better than nothing. And in my opinion, after analyzing the situation, at the core, every child deals with the same thing. They have abandonment issues. They have rejection issues. They have low self-worth, not knowing their value. They have low self-esteem. They feel empty inside. We all deal with the same thing at the core, no matter if our abuse was this big or this small. We're all dealing with the same issues.
I agree with that. And I'm sorry, I have one other thing to say, because I'm very passionate about this subject in specific. Based off of what people say family is. So if somebody says family, they stick together no matter what you say, no matter what you do, no matter what your parents do to you, those are your parents. That is your family. And I have a different perspective on that, because I'm adopted. I was adopted at birth. So I don't have biological parents. So does that mean I don't have a family? So the word family, all of America has a skewed perception of what that is based off of somebody who made that definition, what the definition of family is. So something is wrong when you're a child, but you can't process the fact, you're like, well, wait a minute, this is my family. I was already raised to know that family sticks together no matter what. So we already minimize what we're going through. And then we think that it's normal, or we have to deal with it because society tells us to, when in actuality, family is who you say is family and who loves you 100% and treats you right 100%, not 98%, 100%. And that's how I feel about it. But.
And I know for me, I spent many years advocating for what was going on in my house as a small child. And it took several years and a guidance counselor that finally in high school realized something was wrong and was removed at the age of 17. And there is exceptional isolation and punishment. If you're going to speak out, my experience is that everyone is against you. You have to be prepared to stand alone. And not only did this happen as a child, but I just repeated the dynamic with my partner, who is Colombian and an immigrant. And his mother and I went head to head because it was that family over everything. And it was so volatile that when I had a difference of opinion and I spoke out against the abuse that I saw yet again in my who was to be husband's home while I was pregnant with his child, that my mother, soon to be mother-in-law, was willing to put her hands on me and to assault me and to throw me out on the street for speaking up and out against. So, you know, I was completely ostracized and for speaking up and saying, no, this is not acceptable in my house. We won't be doing that anymore.
Wow. Whew.
And just to piggyback off what Christy said when she talked about it took a guidance counselor stepping in. I think one thing that people don't realize oftentimes is when you are in these types of families, this type of dysfunction is considered normal. So this is your normal. This is the only, as a young person, this is the only worldview that you have unless you are given the opportunity to be exposed to something else. So I think a lot of people, if the cycle is being repeated, they never have the opportunity or they never have someone to interject and say, you know what, this is not healthy. This is how you create healthy relationships. This is how you set healthy boundaries. But we have so many children and young people who are at a disadvantage and they don't get to get that type of information. And if they do receive that type of information, the family sometimes is so abusive and so toxic, they then tell them that these people that are trying to help you are harmful to you. So then they perpetuate even more emotional abuse, neglect, manipulation. And so it takes people that are in my field, it's the social workers, the counselors, it takes those people to step in and say, you know what, some type of intervention has to happen in order for this cycle of abuse to not repeat itself.
Sure. Are you all familiar with Sophie's case? Have you all been seeing that kind of trending around over the past, I think it was month or so? What's your thoughts on that? What's your thoughts on that? Because I personally, I couldn't watch all the video initially. Hearing that child wail and scream because she did not want to go back with her mother, that it broke my heart, y'all. I could not initially watch the full video.
Well, and society is indoctrinated to believe that the mother is the best caretaker for the child, right? So in systems like social service systems, court systems, they are often more led to say that the best place for this child to be is with the mother. And oftentimes it takes so much work to remove a child from a harmful situation and to prove, because the court is going to make the father prove that he is more, he's better capable to take care of that child. So that is a system issue. That's how I see it. It's very much a system issue where the system places this nurturing viewpoint on the mother, and that's not always the case. And so those types of cases are not uncommon. They happen way more than they actually make the media. And the bigger issue there is the system, but also it takes family members to come together, like how the father had to get his mother to help him. He had to publicize these videos, and it's a shame that he had to get public support in order for the court system to side with him. But it just shows how toxic our systems are. And even though we live in a patriarchal society, we still have this issue where systems believe that the mother is always the best parent. The mother is always nurturing. The mother is always caring. And that's just not reality. But our systems don't want to address that because it takes much more work to dismantle something that's dysfunctional than to just go with what we've always done.
Mm-hmm. It's funny that you said that, Ebony, because I personally believe the dysfunction, it doesn't just start with our families. It's a systemic type oppression and enslavement that we're dealing with. For instance, we can talk about racism, systemic racism. Our world, whether we want to believe it or not, is built on white supremacy. It is. When you think about gender inequality, males are they're dominant over females. So whatever a man says, or if a woman wants to say, oh, I've been raped, we question that woman and we blame and we shame her to death. When it comes to parents and children, parents, especially mothers, are valued more over their children. So when a child speaks out about abuse, and for instance, in Sophie's case, this child was telling her, I think it was her grandmother that was responsible for the mediation between the mother and the father because they were going through a brutal custody battle. So the grandmother was responsible for the changing between the child. And this child sat in this car and she said, he's touching she called it a VV, but touching her vagina. And the grandmother, you could tell by her response that she did not believe this child. Her tone said it all. Who's touching you, Sophie? Who's touching? The way no. Children are not believed, especially when it comes to, something that the parent is doing wrong. And that breaks my heart. But again, it's systemic. Whether we want to believe it or not, this stuff is systemic. We operate on a world order according to where you're valued at on the ranking system. And if your value is low, with children being at the bottom, and it just depends on your race, we're just going to keep it real, with children being at the bottom, we're such a vulnerable population. And I look at it like this: who's going to defend children? This one man raped and killed his 9-month-old daughter. He got like 10 or 15 years. That's not acceptable, in my opinion. That's not acceptable.
And when you look at Sophie's case, you also have to look at the fact that, okay, the mother's boyfriend is the one perpetrating. So you also look at the dysfunction and the lack of emotional intelligence within the mother, because oftentimes in situations like that, these women are allowing this abuse to continue because they don't want to be alone. They don't want to be separated from their partner. They don't want to call their partner out on this abuse that they're perpetrating, and they don't want to lose something that they feel is valuable, and they value that attention and affection or whatever, money, because she may be, if she's experiencing poverty, then finances are an issue too, right? This man may be bringing money into the household. He may be keeping a roof over her head. She may be valuing these things more than the protection of her child, which is sad, but that also points to the system, that points to unemployment, that points to welfare, that points to gender inequality, pay inequality. So there's so many factors that go into creating dysfunctional families and it doesn't just stop with just mental illness or a lack of awareness. That's why I keep bringing up systems, because it has so much to do with everything.
And oftentimes there can be a rite of passage. My experience is that there is a lot of projection and these traumas replaying out through us. And so there is a sadistic component, whether it's subconscious or our mothers and our family members are aware of it. But there's this, I know with my mother, there was this element of sabotage. There was this element is, I need you to go through this so that you can experience what I went through. It was almost like this strange need to play out history so that we could bond, possibly a trauma bond. Mm-hmm. But it was, we refer to it sometimes in conversation with my therapist as danger mommy and danger daddy, and then putting you in that position so they can rescue you after they've put us in the very position they put us in. And that was the experience that I've had with my mother. My father, and touching back on something you mentioned earlier of, is it better to not have father involved or a little bit in and out? I didn't meet him until I was 19. I found out by accident that he was my father. I just put 2 and 2 together that my stepfather was not my father. It was obvious, and my mother was dishonest, and I came across some photos and some documents that made me come to the conclusion that this man was my father. So when I was 14, I sent a letter to the address that was in the address book and said, I think you're my father. And he had 2 twin boys. So I, at the age of 14, find out I have a father that I never knew, who has two twin boys who I did not meet until I was 19. So we have a 12-year difference between us, and they're now 25 years old. So that there's that dysfunction again of, you know, who am I? And then I meet this man, he's not even a man. He's not worthy of the title as my father, who I understand why my mother didn't want me to know. Once I met him, I realized, I don't need to have this relationship.
Yeah. And I love that you say that, because my situation is similar. I always knew who my father was, because I have family in the state that he lives in. So I always knew who he was. Whenever we would go up north to visit, we would see him. He always had opportunity to come see me, but he wouldn't do it for whatever reason. I like to think of it possibly when you're younger, you're focused more on what you want to do and just living your life. And now that I see as he gets older, it's like he's trying to reach out to me. However, I discern, this is me, I feel as if he's doing it for his own selfish gain at this point. A child states what they need from you and you ignore them and you pout, and because you don't get your way, or you tell other family members, well, I don't have a daughter because I'm not giving him what he wants. To me, that's not the type of father you need in your life. To me, that's not coming to reconcile. You know what I mean? To me, it comes as if, well, I want this relationship with you now, and you're obligated to have it with me. You're not obligated to have a relationship with anybody, no matter who they are or when they decide to try to come back in your life. And I think the false guilt, the shame, and the fear, and the false obligation that we are conditioned to believe in these families is what keeps so many people stuck. We're doing stuff to please our parents, whether we are aware of it or not. And even if the parent was never around, I think a part of us still feel obligated to these people, as if you owe them. You decide, and going back to a little bit of what Jocelyn was saying, you get to decide who you call family. You're not obligated to do anything. And I think that's something that's holding so many people back. You know, we're still operating under these family rules. And until we stop and question what's going on, and we have the courage to not blindly follow these things, we're going to stay stuck. We're never going to be free as long as we're continuing to operate under these beliefs. You have to buck the system. That's the only way for you to be truly free, in my opinion.
And when you talk about doing things out of obligation and pleasing parents that have been abusive to you, and doing things and adding to and aiding those unhealthy boundaries, oftentimes people don't realize that's a trauma response. So that is usually the trauma response known as fawning. Mm-hmm. So there's freeze, fight, and fawn. So that is usually where you are just so passive and so you're avoidant of confrontation because you don't want to upset your abuser, and you don't want to create more confusion or conflict, even though it's going to come anyway. But your trauma response in your brain is telling you, okay, if you just basically lay down and take this, then this will pass over. And people see that, and sometimes toxic parents take that and they say, well, this is how you be obedient to me, and you listen to me, and I'm the parent and you're the child. And so that becomes your response, but that's a trauma response. That's not just a natural response, because a natural healthy response, once you build that emotional intelligence, you go to therapy, you do your research, you are given information from guidance counselors, teachers, whoever, then you learn, okay, this is not, I don't have to accept this. But then until you do, people fall into that fawn and trauma response.
I would like to add that growing up in an environment that's toxic and things like that, you do get these defense mechanisms, and it can give you, I've never ever shared this with anybody, And I just found out about this like a month ago, except for Trista knows. When I was like 8, I was diagnosed with oppositional defiance disorder, which as a nurse, I'm a newer nurse and I've learned about ODD. It scared me. I was like, okay, I'm a psycho. I am going to end up murdering somebody someday. I have no compassion. I have no empathy. I don't care about others. But you think back, because I had a very compassionate, wonderful, excellent textbook definition of a father. He was excellent. My mother, horrible, abusive, so is my stepfather. When she used to hit me or put a gun to me or choke me with cords, I would fight back. I would hit her, I would punch her, I would do whatever it was. I was not passive. I was very angry. I would destroy my room. I would beat people up. I was terrible. And that's what people, I guess, would see. But that is my coping mechanism. So when I think all this trauma is my response, and that's why I probably had ODD. But what the problem is, and I look at all, and I found this out by looking at my old papers from therapy. The problem is, the psychologist would write, oh, it's apparent that she has ODD. Her mother, is not great. Her father is excellent. She gets along with her father. She only acts out with her mother. Now, come on now. Why wouldn't that throw up some red flags to a psychologist that there is abuse going on? You're behavioral around your mother only, and you act completely wild only around your mother? And she throws you into psych hospitals, and your father has to get a lawyer to get you out, but yet I'm the problem? And that's what the issue is. Maybe now I have ODD because of my abuse, and that's the only way I could cope. Half the abuse that I went through, I can't even remember because I had to go to a different place in my own mind just to make it through those moments. And it's alarming that time and time and time again, unbeknownst to me when I was young, I was being failed by the system time and time again, over and over and over, until I was 20 years old. Because when I was older, there were times that I kind of spoke on things, but nothing was ever done. And I finally had the courage to press charges on my stepfather, but he died last year, which is probably better than any punishment that he would get anyways. But it's just a whole systemic problem, and I think it's absolutely disgusting. And if people don't talk about it, they're not gonna. Nothing's gonna change. And I know sharing your story is not for everybody, but like all of you here, it is amazing, it's encouraging, it's inspiring, because if it's not for people like us that talk about this stuff, some people just don't know, hey, maybe that child's acting up because they're being abused.
Right.
I wanted to add something to what you said. Usually people look at the reaction and they're ready to comment about, oh, they're acting out, or they're doing this, but then nobody really looks at why someone's acting out. Because so when all of you were talking about therapy and access to therapists, it's still not that easy to have access to therapy out here in India. Schools don't help us in the way American schools do. So it's only people with class privilege who can afford go out for therapy. And I've had really bad experiences with a couple of therapists where they decide to act as conformity police. I love that word, so I'm using that word. They look at the way I'm reacting, not the reason why I'm reacting, but the way I reacted. I was angry. I still am sometimes. So yeah, that's my usual go-to reaction. And I scream, I shout when it happens, when I get angry, but then there is something causing me to be angry. It's not that there's nothing happening and all of a sudden I'm bursting out. And when you sit in a therapy session, you are supposed to ask all that. And when the person actually shares, if not all, at least part of what's going on, I think it's very hurtful when people who are supposed to help you out decide to label you as being radical, difficult, and someone who likes to be sensational. That was a word that was actually used for to describe me. So, and it hurts more because these are the people who are supposed to create awareness about the kind of pain a person is in. Because there are lots of times when people my age, when I talk to young people, there are lots of people who go through a lot of traumatic experiences, and the problem is that we don't have anywhere to speak up about it. And when we do, this is how we get labeled. There are instances of suicide every once in a while, and then it is sad that then people wake up and they're like, oh, we should have listened, or what could we have done, we could have prevented it. But then no one's really questioning that. I mean, it's gone to that point because no one ever listened at any point of time. Any time that you spoke up, no one was there listening to you. So what do you really do?
This just goes to show how we blindly follow rules. To say that we are human beings and we're supposed to be these smart, intelligent creatures, if you really look at the fact of the matter, we aren't too bright if you look at it. Because this is my thing, if we just ever stop and question things, I mean, literally stop and question things, we'll see that this doesn't make sense. You know, the whole, even the whole rule of, in these families, tolerate abuse at all costs. But would you actually tolerate abuse from a friend or a boyfriend or a girlfriend? So why would you think it's okay to tolerate it from your parents? If we only took a minute to think for ourselves, that most people never do. Most people never do. And even I think the most woke person on this planet, a lot of us are still operating under the systems. A lot of us are still in bondage to our family systems. Until we stop and question what's going on and think for ourselves, we're going to always be in bondage. Like, I'm a highly sensitive person. So I was born to feel. I knew what was wrong with my family when I was a child. I feel my emotions. I feel other people's emotions. And I think that's how a lot of truth tellers are birthed and a lot of the family scapegoats. They tend to be highly sensitive people. We're justice warriors. We pull people up on their behavior. And one thing I think that dysfunctional families deal with at their core is shame. Shame simply means I'm a bad person. I'm defective. So what happens when we feel that we're shamed, we're these bad people, we start to wear masks. That's pretty much what it is. They wear a mask. And when that truth teller child, and Chrissy, this is why I asked you about that earlier. If you were the truth teller in your family, when that truth teller child speaks up, they're challenging, or shall I say that they're ripping off the mask of that parent. And people that deal with the core issue of shame, they fear exposure, because if you expose them, they're going to have to deal with reality. And that's the core of these families. The now is the glue that keeps them together. They don't want to see the problem. We just deny that it's a problem, and we don't have to fix it. And that's the problem. And I think that's why a lot of children are scapegoated. If you're a nonconformist, if you're one of those children that question things and question authorities, you're not going to make it in these families. And I think that's why a lot of the scapegoats in the families, they eventually walk away because they're nonconformers. They cannot be controlled and contained in these families.
That is exactly where we're at. It came down to ripping the mask off my older son's father and the abuse in that family. And then come to find out my mother was forming an undercover covert alliance with him. So talk about payback. When I left that house at 17, that wound was still there. And my mother took full opportunity 2 years ago, February, when I was pregnant with my second son, to officially show her hand that she had an alliance with my older son's father. And so at this point, I now have to rip the mask off my mother and then rip off the mask of the danger situation she put me in with sexual abusers that she put me in the position to be perpetrated by, who have since then passed. Praise Jesus. They're both gone within 2 years of each other. Talk about that karma, like the best punishment ever, the consequence that I think the stress did them in for being such horrible people. And so then it went even further, and I had to rip the mask off the entire family and my ex's family. They're gone. They're fully silent. I have been blocked. There are a couple of cousins that reach out, but they're done with me and I'm done with them.
Yeah. It's that exposure. And it's so sad because, again, if you're a truth teller in this world, and I see in a few of my nieces and nephews, strong truth tellers, they stand by their convictions, same issues. If you're a truth teller in these families, the only way is out. The only way is out. I don't care how normal you think your family is. If your family is dysfunctional, they all operate the same way. The only reason we don't feel the wrath of our families is because we're playing by the rules. You will never, ever be a threat if you're obedient. As soon as you buck the system and you stop doing what your parents tell you to do and following these family rules, that's when you feel the wrath. In my opinion, these families are insidious and evil, demonic at its core. Demonic at its core. And again, I don't care if you may not think your family is that bad. Buck the system and you'll see exactly what they're about. The reason people aren't seeing it because they're in dysfunction themselves. They're playing by the rules. That's all I'm going to say, y'all. Like, this stuff is real, and I just want people to understand it. But most people will never understand it because they're fearful to death to buck the system. And one thing about truth tellers is something within us. We follow our convictions. We cannot conform. Truth tellers cannot conform. You have to say what's on your mind. You have to stand up for what's right. These nieces and nephews that I'm talking about, they're bad. I'm telling you, the sermon is sharp. And I tell them, I encourage them, don't you back down. You stir the pot. Do what you need to do. Don't silence yourself. Because I look at it like this. So many people cannot become who they need to be because they're so engulfed by the system. We cannot become all that we want to be and all that we're called to be in this world if we're continuing to operate under society's rules, our family rules. If we're operating under these dysfunctional rules, you will never be all that you could be. You will never be all that you can be. And I understand the fear that comes with it. I understand everything surrounding it, but this is my thing. You would never be happy conforming. You're never happy conforming. You will never be happy as a people pleaser. It's impossible. Because think about these people. Are you really happy being a people pleaser? I was a people pleaser. I was forced to be a people pleaser. But you're not happy being anything outside of your true, authentic self. So if your purpose is to speak truth, speak it boldly, speak it courageously. Be who God created you to be, or whatever your belief is, be who you are supposed to be. And I think another problem that these truth tellers and nonconformists have is when they are different, you tend to have a lot of haters. There's a lot of jealousy that follows that. And I deal with that a lot within my family because you being who you are, it reminds them of parts of themselves that they're not embracing. It reminds them of negative parts of themselves that they're trying to hide, that shame. And I think that's a lot of my reason with my mother as well. And I think that she wants me to conform. And because I cannot be that person, it bothers her. And I believe there's a lot of jealousy at the core of my family as well. Even in society, you would find that non-conformers may just have an issue with you just because no cause, hate without cause, simply because you are bold enough and courageous enough to stand in your truth and be who you are called to be. The average person is wearing a mask. The average person is conforming. The average person is too afraid to be who they are. People are jealous of people who are bold. They're jealous of people who are courageous. They're jealous of non-conformers, the different ones. You notice how they always try to get you to conform. Let's say if you're a virgin in society, oh, something's wrong with you. Something's wrong with you. Let's say if you're somebody who want to go outside and live in a tent because society says you have to have this $1 million house. Society says you're supposed to live this way. It's like the oddballs are always the ones that are picked on, and they're prude, and they're being forced to conform for other people to feel comfortable about their beliefs and their lives. So being a non-conformer is a tough job, but I feel like this, if you're called to do it, you would not be happy outside of being who you are. So because it's something that a lot of people wish they could do, but they just don't have the courage to do it for whatever reason.
I would like to add that, to me, once again, this is a problem of everybody's perception of reality and correctness. And I just want to say, for people that want to speak out and should speak out, and you don't have to speak out to the world if you don't want to. Just speaking out for yourself and to yourself, to somebody about your truth is freeing. But just know that to your family, once you do this, you are going to be the liar. You're going to be the one that is exaggerating, or you're the crazy one, and all this other stuff. But I just want people to know that you are going to be this, that, and everything else, even though you weren't that 20 minutes ago when you were keeping your mouth shut. So just know that, and be strong in the fact that this is your truth and you have every right to speak it. And it is the most freeing thing in the world. But just know that your family is going to say all these things about you. And it's because of their construed reality. And it's actually a them problem and not a you problem. And you will find that out. You might not see that the first day you speak about your truth, but it will be revealed to you that you are not the problem. They're the problem. And they act like that because of their incorrect behavior. And so they feel attacked because, well, I mean, their spot is being bombed. I mean, we see who they really are now. And like when I exposed my mother and my stepfather on Facebook, tons of people were like, we always knew kind of about them, whatever, and they saw who they really were, and they supported me, but they didn't. And she would message me. She still messages me to this day. Oh, I wish I would have never adopted you. I should have killed you. Nobody's ever going to believe you. Like, she would message me this stuff. Like, I still have the messages. They get so angry when the truth is revealed, because it must be embarrassing to live like that. So I just want people to know that when you speak your truth, there are things that come with that. And just because they are saying negative things does not mean that you made a bad decision of saying your truth. There's nothing more freeing than that. But just realize that these people get very defensive. These people get very angry when they are exposed. Because it's a huge secret, I guess, to treat people this way, because they know it's wrong. So then when the truth is finally out there, you're going to see, you wouldn't expect these people to say these kind of things all the time. But it's because they've been exposed.
And that lends itself to the importance of building a support system, right? Because like Nikila was saying, not everyone has a support system or outlet outside of their family, because and sometimes it's culture, and sometimes it's because the family is so abusive and so toxic and so manipulative that they have isolated you from everyone other than family. Right. So I just want to encourage people to, yes, speak out, but also make sure that you are trying to build some type of support system outside of your family, whether that is, and sometimes your only support may be a therapist if you have access to therapy. Sometimes the only support you have may be a hotline or a coworker or your church. Just make sure that if you are living within a dysfunctional family, if you have dysfunctional family members, make sure that you are building some type of healthy support outside of that, because it can definitely be detrimental and traumatizing to speak out and then have these family members come against you and then you have nowhere to go to speak about how you feel because they're coming against you, or you have no one to tell you, no, don't back down. You are doing the right thing. What you're saying is the truth. So that's just important because dysfunctional families will isolate you a lot of the time, and sometimes people don't realize it because they're taught to believe, no, look who's here. Your family is here. You don't have friends. You don't have anybody else. We're the only ones that care about you. When really they're manipulating you, especially when you're dealing with a narcissist in your family. But that's a whole nother video.
And it's good to say that because I think that requires a separate video because I think that's a whole nother level. However, it's just so much I have down here to talk about. But as y'all mention things, I think it's good to interject this here. I have my beliefs about it. Do you all believe that we are living just in a narcissistic society? I personally believe most parents are narcissists, and I'm going to tell you why, especially toxic parents. This is my belief. Now, I'm not no clinician, but this is what I believe from my understanding of it. I think once a person becomes a parent, if they haven't dealt with their trauma, if they haven't started to process it, your trauma magnifies itself like tenfold once you become a parent. You typically magnify your trauma in relationships. And I think that once you have a child, that's the most intimate relationship because they're a part of who you are. And I think once parents that are toxic have children, they immediately start to view these children as tools to make them happy, as extensions of themselves, to please them, to fulfill their unfulfilled dreams, to do as I say, to make me happy. And I think that that's the cause of a lot of the issues that we're seeing within these families. And when I think of that and all the rules, and at the core of these families, it's all about the parent. It's really not about the children at the core of it. It's about fulfilling the parent's needs. And whether they're doing it unconsciously, they're utilizing that child to fulfill their unfulfilled needs. So that's why I believe that most parents are narcissists. And keep in mind, narcissism is a personality disorder. It's a personality disorder, and it's typically caused by trauma. Trauma, I feel narcissists are created. And I think that especially in like the baby boomer generation, I just believe that we were just birthing a generation of narcissists. I just believe that's what it is. A lot of our parents are narcissists at the core, is what I believe. And that's my opinion of it. And what do you all think about it?
I think what you said is very much true. And it's also kind of interlinked with how capitalism as a system works. When you work and the way you contribute, the kind of extroversion that is demanded of you, and how you are assessed outside in your professional spheres, it has a lot to do with the image that you show. And you're encouraged to build a persona for, something that you show to the outside world and something that you show to your inner sphere and all that. So this is basically encouraging narcissism, and capitalism as a system kind of took off, or in a larger sense from the baby boomer generation, right? And now we can see how entrenched it's become, and with social media and everything else, I feel like narcissism is just on the rise, and we're all to a certain extent narcissistic. And I think if and when it crosses and it becomes detrimental to who we are, that is when it becomes a problem. But we're all narcissistic in varying levels.
I think a big problem about narcissism and personality disorders in general is, first of all, you have to come to the realization that you have an issue, and these people have a hard time realizing that they have issues. Second of all, medication doesn't help with these things. It is talk therapy. Do these people want to sit and talk or admit they have a problem? No. So what can you do for these people? It is very difficult. And how to solve that problem, I don't know. Because if you can't come to the realization yourself that you have issues, something's the matter, it's very hard for you to get effective treatment that will actually work for you. So with my mother, for example, yes, she is narcissistic. All she cares about is herself. I don't think that she wanted me to maybe fulfill things that she was never able to, but I never got compliments. She always said I was dumb. All she cared about was herself. She always said I was fat and all this stuff, but then again, that's because she has like an eating disorder type thing. So she would project her issues onto me, I guess, so I can see what you're saying. But and she was on psych medications pretty much, since I was growing up, but it never did anything. But that's because, she wasn't going to therapy. She was just taking medications. So it's a very tricky thing because most of these people are narcissistic. But what people don't realize is it is very hard to treat narcissism or anything that is personality disorder related. And I can even go as far as to the other point, like with my ODD, how it's a coping mechanism. Even in my relationship now that I've been in for 7 years, and my boyfriend is extremely supportive. He is one of the main reasons that I am healing. I will act out towards him. And he has never met my mother because since the day I met him, he told me that if I need to go get help, and if I were to ever talk to her again, that would be a problem because they want me to even associate with that family. Thank goodness I have a great guy. So it's hard. And even with myself, with my ODD, like I said, I still sometimes have these behaviors, even though I talk through it. And I'm not an abuser. So that it makes it, I can only imagine how, unfortunately, a lot of the times, basically what I'm saying very bluntly is narcissistic behavior does not change. And I know a lot of people, it's family, it's your mom, it'll work out, it's your dad. Let's bone up here on psychiatric disorders, especially personality disorders, because it's not that easy. Even if these people did want to change, unfortunately, it's not that easy, and it probably won't happen. And that's just me being completely honest.
And I think
go ahead. Even if you look at other disorders, right? Not just narcissism. If you look at just using depression for an example from my own life. So my mother was depressed, and she raised us fighting through depression and anxiety. So even though my mother was not toxic herself, she never perpetuated any type of abuse on us because of the depression that she was experiencing, and because the fact that she was adopted, and she was adopted by a very loving family, a family that took great care of her, but they were a very old-fashioned, old-school way of thinking type family. They believed in discipline. They believed in strict rules. They believed in raising your children in the church. So my mother, she copied a lot of the way that she was raised and raised us that way, not realizing that, okay, I'm raising my children in a different time frame. My children have their own personalities. So I'm just going to struggle through it and do the best that I can just because I'm fighting through depression. And because I was adopted from a dysfunctional family, I feel like the way that I was raised was the best way. And not saying that it was negative, but it was just kind of like, I'm just going to do the best I can. And I'm not going to learn anything different necessarily, or I'm not going to try anything different just because I feel like this is what saved me, so this is the best way. Does that make sense? But then if you look at a parent that's borderline, there'll be a lot of enmeshment there because they don't want their children to leave. They don't want their children to make new friendships. They don't want their children to contradict them in any way or confront them in any way because they have that high intensity of emotions and so many attachments that their borderline personality disorder is like, I will do anything to make my children stay with me. I don't want them to get married. I don't want them to have friendships. I don't want them to admire anyone else other than me. I think narcissism is very popular right now, and I think it's one of the ones that's easy to identify, but it's not the most prevalent. I think depression, borderline, even schizophrenic, those are all way even more popular. I think narcissism is the most detrimental and the most dangerous, but there's so many others that you could talk about too.
And I like to think that it's not prevalent because narcissists don't go to therapy. They don't. So when you look at the statistics, only like 0.1%. Yeah, because they don't believe they have a problem. And I think that's the problem. They don't believe they have a problem. People that they abuse come to therapy because of them. You see what I'm saying? So narcissists, at the core of these people are deep shame, deep-rooted shame. It's going to take a narcissist, I would say, to hit rock bottom before they ever can possibly look up and say, well, maybe I have a problem. It's going to take everybody to leave them. They're going to have to be high and dry to even believe that something maybe.
They still wouldn't, I mean, not to interrupt you, they still wouldn't admit it then. It would be everyone else. Everyone else left me, and they would then have a victim mentality and a blaming mentality of there's nothing wrong with me. Everyone left me. And then they would just find a new supply.
Right.
That's exactly what my mother's going through right now. Sorry. But like I said, my stepfather died a year ago, a little over a year ago. When I spoke up, because my stepdad did this kind of stuff to my brothers, people in the family, it was a hot mess. And then my mother was mostly abusive to me, but was abusive to everybody else as well. But once I spoke out, now she has absolutely nobody, literally nobody. Just like her friends or whatever. But now, especially since her husband died, she is completely alone. And right now, poor pitiful her, she is the victim right now. She is all alone right now. I mean, so that's just something that she's just gonna have to work through, I guess. But that's exactly what she's going through right now. She's all alone. She don't have anybody. So now I'm curious to see, because she's textbook a narcissist. Will she get help? Will she ever admit to any of these things? Because last time she messaged me, I was still all these other names, and nothing I ever said was true. So I'm just wondering, now that she has absolutely nobody, not her kids, not a single one of them, not her nephews anymore, not one, her husband or anybody. So I'm gonna see, is she gonna change her ways? Probably not. And that'll just prove my theory here is the fact that these people, they don't have a clue. And that's unfortunate about narcissism. They don't have a clue. And so I don't know what she's going to do with herself. But I know that she's going to be alone for the rest of her life because she has no realization of her behavior. It's mind-blowing.
It's sad. It's sad. And even though, I talk out about it, me being the person I am, I still have a level of compassion for these people. However, understanding their situation does not excuse their behavior. It does not. And it doesn't excuse the behavior. And it's just a sad, unfortunate situation. And it shows you how important it is for us to break these cycles so that we don't pass down this trauma to next generations, because everybody was a victim in some type of way. And that's the thing that breaks my heart, that this is a vicious cycle. We all are victim in some type of way as it relates to our dysfunction and our issues. And the cycle will continue if somebody don't break it. Someone has to break it. We have to break this cycle, because if not, it's going to continue to the next generation. Now, I want to switch it up a little bit and go over some of the toxic conditions and beliefs. Now, we've talked about a lot of them, but some of these core conditions and beliefs, lists of unspoken rules in these families are, and a lot of you are probably familiar with them, do what looks good. It's all about image in these families, to make us look good. Don't be a bother and don't rock the boat in these families. Deny the things that you don't want to see, act like nothing's wrong, and it'll go away. The parents love to say, do what I say, even if I do the opposite. There's a lot of hypocrisy in these families. Express only happy, positive feelings. You know, you're not allowed to feel or display any negative emotions in these families. It's wrong to be angry or sad, because most of these parents, I believe, they're immature and not emotionally intelligent. Let's see, never question our behavior, just go along with it. You must conform to what we expect of you, no matter what. Your needs are not as important as our needs. That's very, never question anything. Children should respect their parents no matter what. There are only two ways of doing things, my way or the wrong way. Children should be seen, not heard. And it's wrong for a child to be mad at their parents. And I think that's why so many people are dealing with repressed anger. I see that a lot in my family. A lot of people have repressed anger. And I think that's the cause of a lot of triggering and explosion on me, especially with one of my siblings that I haven't talked to in 2 years because of this very reason. I see the problem, but if they don't see it, you got to save yourself. You see what I'm saying? I see the issue. And it's like explosion after explosion, explosion after explosion, because there's something that I'm doing, living my life, something that I'm saying that's reminding them of something they regret within themselves, within their life, that they hate within themselves. It's reminding them of something, and I notice that I'm always their target. But I understand the reason now as I understand conformity more. Also, don't be more successful than your father, your mother. Don't leave your own life, and don't ever stop needing me. I see this a lot as well when parents, they give their children money and keep them dependent on them so they can never be independent. So they will always need them. And I like to think that they're utilizing that to fill a void within them. So y'all familiar with a lot of these false, or shall I say, toxic conditions and rules and beliefs?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and a lot of them goes back to that lack of boundaries and lack of emotional intelligence, because a lot of times when you talk about toxic parents, they don't want you to express negative emotions or sad emotions, because they don't know how to process that. They don't know how to respond to that. They don't know how to be comfortable with that. So they don't know what to say to you. It brings up negative emotions in them, so they don't want to deal with that. So they rather just keep all of that suppressed. Don't talk to them about it. They don't want to hear about it, because it's very uncomfortable. If they can't deal with their own emotions, they definitely can't deal with the emotions of their child. So that goes back to a lack of access to certain things, a lack of wanting to grow and learn about certain things, and not teaching you. If you didn't learn about healthy boundaries, you can't teach your children about them. If you didn't learn how to process emotions and emotionally regulate, like you were talking about the outbursts, that's a lack of emotional regulation. So if you don't know how to control your emotions, and when you talk about people that speak up, people that push back, these people often learn how to practice self-control. You learn how to set boundaries with your family. You learn how to think before you speak or think before you act. You learn how to be proactive and not reactive. So they look at you as that's where that jealousy comes in at, and they look at you as thinking that you're better than them, when really you're just being a healthy person. But to them, healthy is not normal, and healthy is dangerous, and healthy is a threat. And it's sad that it's that way, that once you become a healthy person, now you also become a target in a way.
And that's that scares me, for the children. You're growing up and you have parents with this behavior. You don't think anything's wrong, or that's family, so you have to stick with them. So then you're going through your childhood. You're 18 now. You have all these unhealthy coping mechanisms, and then this is just going to perpetuate into the next generation when you have kids. So it's like, if we don't catch these behaviors and catch this abuse and fix and change the cycle when these children are children, how are you ever going to break these generational curses? Especially if they don't think anything's wrong once they become an adult. And then now that's their behavior as well. So that just worries me, because because clearly a lot of people don't know the signs of abuse and things like this from the outside perspective. So how do we fix this? It just, it's concerning to me.
It's even more complicated when you bring culture into the picture, and everything that you explain now, if that is part of your culture and if that is what constitutes the collectivist nature of your culture, speaking up always becomes about, oh no, this is not our culture, this is a Western individualistic kind of a culture, so this isn't ours, you can't really speak up or you can't really talk about these because you're basically just adhering to what's the norm in a Western culture and not really our culture.
So, let's talk about shame. At the core of these families, dysfunctional families, I think we all can pretty much see that as shame. Feeling as if I'm a bad person. I have to wear this mask. I have to, be something else. And pretty much anyone who challenged that or show them by telling them the truth of who they truly are, this person can become a threat or a target. Now, let me ask you this question. Do you all believe that these parents genuinely love their children unconditionally?
No. And I know that I feel like that for a fact. Sorry, here's my kitty. But no, I don't think they have the ability to love anybody really but themselves. That's how I feel. Considering what I know love is and the love that I felt, like I said, it was weird because when I was a child, 50% of the time I had a good family. The other half of the time it was horrible. And I could tell the difference. I could tell that my father loves me. I could tell that my birth mother never loved me. Like the moment they adopted me, like you could tell she didn't love me. She didn't even want me. I don't think that these people that treat people like that, most of the time, I don't think they have the ability to love. And at least that's where I'm at right now. And I think that in time, maybe that will change, maybe it won't change. But for anybody to treat anybody like that, I feel like all you care about is yourself. That's how I feel. You can't love through that. You can't treat somebody like that and love them. You can't do both. You can't. So maybe they want to love them and they don't know how, but they don't, because that's just not how you treat people. But that's just how I feel. I don't think there's really a right or wrong answer to that.
I agree with you, Jocelyn. I feel the same way. I feel that you can't give what you don't have. So if you don't know love, you can't give it. So I pretty much agree with what you're saying. What about the rest of you guys? How do you all feel about that?
Oh, I was going to say, I think there's different levels to that. And like Jocelyn said, that there's no right or wrong answer, but I think it depends on the person and the situation, because you can have a narcissistic parent who just cannot, they just don't know how to, they don't, as much as they think they do, they cannot, they really can't comprehend that type of love. But then you can also just have a parent who is dysfunctional and toxic because they are repeating, what was taught to them. Like I said, I came from an upbringing that was just very old school, and you just listen to your parent because they're the adult. You listen to your parent because they're the ones that have experienced life and you haven't. So, right is right and wrong is wrong. But they can still show love and affection. It's just that for whatever reason, maybe trauma that they have gone through stops them from doing that. They are not comfortable with that emotion, or they express it only at certain times. I think you can have a toxic parent who they can show that they love their child unconditionally, but they just have toxic beliefs about what a child can do and can't do. So they have toxic beliefs about the privileges a child should have because they are a child, but they can still love their child unconditionally. So I think it depends on the person, their mind frame, whether or not they have personality disorder, their culture and their upbringing. I think there's a lot that goes into it.
Let me ask you this really quick, y'all. Okay, going back to those conditions and beliefs that pretty much underlines all dysfunctional families, somehow or the other. Now, let me ask you a question. If a child don't obey these rules, if they don't conform to these rules, is that considered conditional love? If the child is not obeying the rules, and what typically happens, let's say if they don't do what the parent says, or they don't go to the school that the parent wanted them to go to, and they start ignoring the child. I mean, do you think that comes off as love to the child? You see what I'm saying? Or if you decide not to marry into the religion that your family is in, and next thing you know, they shun you. I mean, is that really unconditional love? Do y'all think that that's unconditional love?
I had go ahead. I had an experience 2 years ago, February. My family was very covert. The rules were not spoken clearly. Things were, the goalposts were moved. There was passive aggressiveness. There was manipulation. Nobody expressed how they felt. But 2 years ago, in the Colombian household, when I was pregnant with my partner's son, we had 2 children. My mother-in-law, to be, was so abundantly clear about those conditional expectations. She called up the ex-girlfriend, made her come over and triangulate to drive a wedge. And then when I said this will not be tolerated, she pulled a knife and scissors on me and tried to stab me. And then I called the police, and there was a family meeting. And by the time I got home, after I stepped out to take a breather about 5 hours later, the family sat with him, including the ex-girlfriend, and his mother said, if you leave with her, you're out of this family. You're done. Change the locks. They changed the locks. The local police department put me back in the house. They said that's illegal. You can't do that here. We don't do that in Massachusetts. There are protective laws and rights around where people live. And what a mess. But she made it abundantly clear that if he stayed with me and was a father to his now 2 children that I have chosen for adoption, and placed with their godparents, to give them a proper upbringing. And we still see each other. He and I still have a very secretive relationship 3 years later, but we're not allowed to be together. Nobody knows that we are together.
I like to think as long as you're following the rules, you would never be able to see how dangerous these families can be. And I'm going to let you speak, Nikila, and I'm going to go into a quick story of something that I saw online, and I can let you all tell me what you think about this as far as was it conditional or unconditional love.
When we talk about trauma and dysfunction, I think it's very important to understand the intensity of it, and also see if it was intentional or unintentional. You understand if it's unintentional when you have those hard conversations with the people involved. And I speak from a very personal experience, and also I understand that this take on dysfunction can be very different from what is usually said. But I think from my cultural perspective, I understand that when you look at the intensity and you decide to put in the effort to have those hard conversations, and you also understand that the other side is listening to them, maybe does not know how to incorporate them or change their ways, but is still ready to put in the effort to have those conversations and understand where you're coming from, I think that is when you realize that there is hope. Like you are speaking and the other side is listening, and it's hard. I mean, it's so easy to just say all this, but it's so hard to actually have those conversations. But I think when you see the scope for all that, that's when you take a call between stepping out or still being within the system and putting in the effort. So there's nothing like a universally accepted way of doing things. It really is, I mean, it varies from person to person, and it's very individual in its nature. So I think it really comes down to what your intuition thinks. Can you handle it? Can you do it? Is the other person or the other side listening to what you're saying? It all comes down to that. And when you think that the other person or the other bunch of people out there are actually listening to you, I think maybe then putting in the effort to have those conversations actually matters. I kind of feel the need to put in the effort because I feel like if I don't, this is just going to be a cycle that's going to repeat again and again. People are just going to be frustrated. No one's really putting in the effort, and people are just accepting things as they are because they don't know how to fight it. And I feel like, I mean, as a chain breaker, I feel like it's my burden to carry. I wish I didn't have to, but then I feel like my doing this is kind of making it easier for, you know, the next generations and other people.
And that's what it should do. And I love that. You know, I think when we're burdened with a problem, it's our responsibility to change it. So I felt like if it's placed on your heart to do it, and if you're fed up with how it is, you are the cycle breaker in that generation. And that's great. Have you all heard of, I think it was a Netflix documentary made out of this called The Honor Killing? The Honor Killing. I think it was in Pakistan. It was one of the Middle Eastern countries. And it was a heavy like Islamic Muslim culture. And this man had a hire for kill for his two daughters, 17 and 18-year-olds, because they were dating and dealing with guys outside of their religious culture. So he had them killed because he said they brought shame upon the family. What do y'all think about that? Do y'all think that that's conditional or unconditional love? Do y'all think that you can actually love your children to death?
That is
Definitely
conditional.
But do y'all see how the connection of shame, how dangerous it can be to destroying your own children, to destroying your own family? You know, I wanted to mention that because I think it just seems as if the closer people get to vulnerability and the closer people get to truth, that it seems like that's when all hell breaks loose. And again, as I think as Christy and Jocelyn and I were saying, because I think we can relate to more of the had to make that decision to kind of step away for your sanity. This stuff is evil at its core. And I know it's not everybody's situation. However, I wanted to read that article for people to see just how dangerous shame can be. And shame, again, is at the root of these dysfunctional families. And if you buck the system, and not to scare anyone, but in some of these cultures and some of these families, y'all, it can get disastrous. And it just breaks my heart to see this.
It's a common problem in collective cultures because you have these unsaid rules of membership where you're expected to behave a certain way. And when you don't, there are repercussions. And this makes older people in a family react in such a way. I know because it's, I don't have a personal connection to it. I can just step back and take an objective view of it and speak and say what I'm saying right now. But it's horrible when you read such incidents. But then when there are these rules and expectations that culture has from you, you behave a certain way and you expect the members of the family to behave a certain way. And when you don't know how to stand on your own and be different, this is a form of peer pressure that you're giving in. So you react that way because you cannot handle what people in your community or in your society are going to say, and that is really harmful.
And I was just going to say that I think that retaliation in general, when you don't follow the rules, whether spoken or unspoken, is a common thing. And like I said, that it happened to me as well, just by like getting nasty messages and things like that. But like, it always crosses my mind, like, what if my mom, well, whatever you want to call her, my mom goes to my dad's house and tries to hurt him, or because I spoke out or whatever. She was always envious of my father because I loved my father. I always spoke good on my father. My mother would always say terrible things about him. My father never once, and people may think I'm exaggerating, lying, whatever. My father never once spoke ill about my mother in front of me when I was a kid. Never did he ever. He just wouldn't disrespect me like that. So I just think that retaliation is something that you should unfortunately anticipate when you decide to speak out. Mostly from the abuser, because that's natural instinct for these people, is to get defensive because it's a secret. And you're outing them, or you're outing the secret, or the rules, or whatever. You're breaking the rules. So I do think that retaliation is a thing. It's a real thing, and I think that it happens more times than not if you're speaking out, unfortunately. So you do, like Ebony was saying, you do need to have a support system, because these people aren't going to have your back anymore. The people that speak so much on family. So you really do need to have a support system, because I do think retaliation is a real thing.
So true. I know that with what happened to me 2 years ago, when this assault happened, my own family of origin, it activated some of that unresolved trauma. And as I was getting support for this complex PTSD that I've now been finally diagnosed with, it's been nice to actually say, this is what I've been working with and trying to heal, and where it comes from. I found that the retaliation, there were no boundaries. You know, these people that speak so much on family, I was getting messages while pregnant of drive your car off a bridge and kill yourself and take your meds. I didn't take meds at the time. You know, my own family, and there were relatives that I was astonished who showed their true colors. Off came the mask, out came all of the players that some of them I wouldn't have even thought had it in them to play that game, to be involved, but they were.
And that goes back to that that mentality and that fear of being isolated, right? So at some point, it's almost like they felt like, okay, let me attack you. Let me join in with the rest of the family and attack this person, because it's better for me to have the support of the family than to go with what is right and what is different and what is outside of our norm, because then I'll be isolated too. So that goes back to fear and shame. Well, I don't want to be alone, and I don't want to be afraid, and I don't want to have no one, and I don't want to be called this and that. So I'm going to go along with this. I'm going to join in on this. I'm going to stay within the bounds of the family because I don't want to become someone that is ostracized as well. Which just adds to the cycle of abuse and manipulation. But it's so common, and it's so sad that it happens, because at some point you just have to stand up for what is right. And you have to, I believe in protecting children at all costs.
Yes,
I don't care what adult you have to call out. I don't care who has to go to jail. It is, you have to protect children.
Mhm.
They can't protect themselves.
That's so true, because that's another issue that was in my family. I was protecting people. It's like I was a parent to everybody. I'm everybody's parent, and I'm protecting children that aren't even mine. And it's like the parents don't even give a care about it. But again, I would never regret it, because I look at it the same way. Children are innocent, and I would not live with something on my conscience happening to these children, and knowing that I had as an adult, pretty much the ability to speak up, and nothing was said. So I pretty much, had to reach out to, someone in my family and confront them on it. But exactly what happened. They got defensive, and they withheld the children for years from me. It's all a control. Children being used as pawns in these families, but it's the child that gets hurt in these situations. But again, me being the person that I am, I cannot sit by and just allow a child to be abused, neglected. It's not going to happen with me. And I think that's why I have so many issues with people within my family, because they don't want to hear the truth about themselves and their situations. And let's look at possible ways that the abuser groomed these people in the family to stay, because there's a lot of triangulation in these families. There's a lot of saying this behind your back and saying that to someone else. There's a lot of working from the abuser's part on turning people against you.
I know for me, like I said, I was with my mother for a week, then my father for a week, and my mother had a husband, and she was very physically and emotionally, very emotionally abusive towards me. So when she would do that, here comes my stepdad swooping in, and he's going to protect me. He would stop her from doing those things to me. So I'm just like, wow, I mean, great. And from the outside looking in, that looks like, oh, my stepdad, he is my best friend. I really get along with him. He's my hero, because to me, he basically was. But then, when my mom's not looking, he'll put his hands down my shirt or down my pants or something like that, and things like that. So he's covered, because remember when your mom would abuse you, I would come in and save you from that. So then when my mom's abusing me and saying all these things, she's saying terrible things about my father. So that has me confused. Like, okay, my dad's the bad guy, not my mother. So then she's protected. And you could even tell, like I said, when I was looking at my old therapy records, I was brainwashed, for sure. So had me thinking, well, my dad's the bad guy. My mom just talks to me this way because that's normal. And my stepdad protects me from my mom whooping me. And no matter what he does to me, that's okay, because then I'm safe from my mother. So they all have their kind of ways of, we're going to put this person against you, because then we can use that to cover myself, because all they care about is covering themselves. And it's a weird situation. Like with my stepdad and my mom, I never got to see this through because he died. But like, eventually the truth was going to come to light, because I had the pictures that he sent of me when I was 7 years old, naked in the bathtub, sending me text messages of, oh, you're hot. I have messages of that. And it's like, at the end of the day, if that all would have came to light while he was alive, would my mother have stayed on his side still? Would he have outed her? Would she have outed him? But they all just, at the end of the day, they're trying to protect each other. I mean, they're trying to protect themselves. They're not trying to protect each other. They don't care about anybody else but themselves, so they can keep abusing people. And that's at least how it was for me.
I would find that with growing up with my mom, I would have to say, if a clinician were to look at her, would probably observe a borderline personality. And so she would have these meltdowns and these tantrums, and she'd set me up for failure after failure and introduce me to the couple that groomed me for 5 or 6 years to prepare to molest me. And luckily I had a loud enough mouth to speak up against it, but my mother still sided with this couple that were babysitting me for 5 or 6 years. And my mom would be on the horn calling up every relative and telling them just how difficult I was of a child. And I did go through after that almost molestation incident where my behavior in 7th grade, this happened at the end of 6th grade coming into 7th, was so bad. And I began to wear a lot of makeup and dress very dark. And I was very behaviorally acting out, which was so out of character for me. And so that one year I was also sneaking out of the house and I was smoking cigarettes and I was experimenting with marijuana. But by 8th grade, I got pulled into the wrestling team by a coach, and I was the first and only female on this team. And where this really, my mother, the extent that she was willing to go and what she had been doing came forward when I was with my cousin. It was her childhood best friend and my mother's first cousin. She has 6 kids, and I grew up with 3 of them as my closest friends. And so when I was around, I was in my early 20s, old enough to drink wine. So I was over at my mother's childhood best friend's house. You know, I don't know what number cousin she is. And we were getting presents together. It was Christmas for the kids and getting the stockings together. And we're drinking a ton of wine. And she finally looks at me and says, you know, I was just kind of confused all these years because your mother used to call me up and call us up and call up your cousin, you know, your other cousin, Charlene, and just go on and on about how difficult of a child you were. So years later, she's like, you know, something was just really off because we would see you coaching these kids and you're a damn good coach and you're in the best shape of your life. And then your mom's calling us and telling us what a piece of shit you are. And that was when it really hit me when I was in my 20s. And my cousin Kathy was like, you know, all those years that your mother threw you under the bus. And that's when I started to realize she had been calling everyone. And she used to sink and sabotage me going to school just to call the truancy officer to come pick me up. I was best friends with the local law enforcement who would chauffeur me to school. And not that I didn't want to go. That was my only freedom. My education was my window out.
Yeah. I had very, very similar situation as you. My mother would try to sabotage me all the time. I had vertigo and I would like run into the walls of school. She called the school and said I was on drugs. And I was like, Mom, I've never taken drugs in my life. And she would do the same manipulating behavior. Just, oh my goodness. So I just want you to know you are certainly not alone. My mother had a lot of tendencies that your mother had as well. So.
And it's so funny because it all goes back to the core of shame. People will do anything so they don't have to deal with themselves, which is that true person underneath that I'm defective, I'm a horrible person, that true belief that they have about themselves. People will do so much to not have to look at themselves as they truly are. And that's just a prime example. The stories that you all shared, a prime example of that. They have to make it seem like it's somebody else's fault. They're not the problem.
I think that sometimes, and how I like to see things is that in life, we are all given a toolbox. Some people got a hammer. You might have a hammer too, but you might not know how to use it. I know how to use it. We might have totally different tools, but we all have options and we all do things differently. And sometimes you may not be equipped with the same things I'm equipped with. And some people just don't have emotional intelligence and how to treat people in their toolbox. And it's like, is that something you can get? Is that something that you can develop and learn how to get? Or is that something that if you don't have, you don't have? It's just, yeah. And I don't know the answer to that, but.
You can develop it. It's something that is, it is something that you can learn. It's just a matter of if you, like what you see a lot when you're talking about people that are narcissistic and borderline and just very toxic and abusive parents. Sometimes it's just the fact that, like we were saying earlier, they don't want to admit they have a problem. They don't see themselves as having a problem. They see everyone else as having the problem. So they don't understand that that is something that they can change and build. And it's oftentimes the victims of that abuse who have to then learn how to build that toolbox for themselves or pull on their own personality traits to say, you know what, I don't have to accept this, or I can build healthier coping skills, like what you were talking about with the ODD, and that really just being your coping mechanism for the trauma that you were experiencing. Okay, so then as you become an adult, you change those coping skills to then learn how to regulate your emotions and react more positively to things that happen to you or trauma that you experience, because you can face trauma as a child and react poorly or react negatively or react very emotionally, and then face that trauma again as an adult. But once you build up the tools and the coping skills that you need, you can have a very different reaction to it. So it's just a matter of where you are in life, what your mentality is, how traumatized you are, and what your perspective is on whether or not it's possible to change that.
And now that's a thing I'm saying, like, as far as children, I keep on referring to children because that's usually where it starts with the abuse. Why should I have to figure out a way out of these situations? I'm a child. Why should I have to figure out as an adult what a healthy relationship looks like? That is my parents' responsibility. That is not my responsibility. That is not my burden to bear. It shouldn't have been, at least, and unfortunately, you know, that's the way the cards were handed to me. But I think it is so sad that a child has to be making such adult decisions, and that's only if they have somebody in their life to see some sort of normalcy to know it's wrong, because if you don't have that, you're going to think all this stuff is normal. So then as an adult, you're in a world of problems, in a world of hurt.
But I think it'd be so nice to have classes like this for people to be able to, you know, spot abuse and, you know, talk about, kind of give them an idea of what's normal, what's, you know, unnormal, unhealthy, so that they could have some type of understanding. Because I like to think that children are the closest thing to authenticity out of all humans. Children are. But as we start to mold and shape them, they become mask wearers like most adults are. And I like to think if you're going to mold, and I think someone mentioned this before, if you're going to start with breaking cycles, you need to start with children, because there's hope for all children. I like to think there's hope for all children. Now, all adults, I like to keep hope alive, but it's harder with adults. It's hard with adults to break chains and cycles. But children, if you could teach them and raise them right, they'll get it. I think
it's hard for adults because you're going through 18 years of this craziness. You know how hard it is to undo that?
That's
like,
right.
And the coping mechanisms that you get from being abused. And like I said, I've had help. I've reached out to people for 7 years now, and I still have days that aren't good. So, I mean, it takes a lot of undoing. If you go through your childhood without receiving help. And I think that a lot of people don't get help.
So ladies, I thank each and every one of you from the bottom of my heart for participating in this, because this is a conversation that needed to be had, and it's so hard to find people that are open to talking about it, or at that place within their life and their walk to where they're comfortable enough to talk about it. Because I have a lot of people in my inbox, over things that I post, and, you know, asking questions and just saying how they can relate. But you know what? Those people, they would never like a post because this is so personal, to where liking a post on Facebook is seen as exposure or breaking the rules for some people. People are that afraid. People are that paranoid in these systems, to where they're afraid to even like a post or comment, because that's exposing what's going on. And you don't expose your family. You don't talk about your mother. You don't talk about your father. You don't talk about your family. And so many of us were brought up under these rules of shame, false guilt, false obligation, and fear, to where it's that bad. We can see it in the world, but when it comes to our families, we don't want to talk about it. We'll talk about everything else. But you better not talk about my mama. You better not talk. We don't want to talk about nothing pertaining to our families. And it's so funny because our families is the root of where it all starts, in my opinion. Yes, you need to understand history, but you can make the change within your family. You can make the change in your family. Someone has to do it. So I thank you, ladies. And for those of you watching, I thank you for tuning in. Be sure to catch us every Wednesday, Eastern Standard Time, 8 p.m., right here on Facebook. Also, check us out on Instagram and YouTube. Until next time.